All right, welcome back into the podcast. Always enjoy having this guy on. He's been on a few times, and it's usually right before we play the Vegas/Oakland Raiders, since he's been on this podcast several times. He is Jason Fitz. He's of Yahoo Sports and Fox Sports Radio, formerly of ESPN. I'm sure you've heard him. Always have good conversations on here about the NFL and the Bears and Raiders in general. Jason, Bill Zimmerman, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. Although, could we just one time in our friendship, could we have this conversation about a Bears-Raiders game where we're both really excited about the season? It just feels like every time we talk, it's like, well, your team sucks, my team sucks. Which one's going to suck more on Sunday? That's just our world.
Yeah, it really is brutal. And I don't know exactly what the numbers are for the Raiders in terms of sustained success. When, I know that there were a couple good seasons with Carr, but in terms of trying to have, back-to-back good seasons, the Bears literally haven't had back-to-back winning seasons since they went to the Super Bowl that long ago with Devin Hester. That was the last time they did back-to-back winning seasons, just mediocrity after mediocrity. So I want to talk to you about the Raiders and kind of everything going on in that organization. But first, I've never want to bury the lead here. When we talk Chicago Bears, we have to talk Justin Fields, because going into the season, he really was all that mattered. Everything else was kind of building up the foundation. I mean, some over-enthusiastic Bears fans thought playoffs were here, but I didn't think this was a playoff team. I thought this was a team that was going to go from awful to being competitively bad, win 7 games, kind of in that range. That was kind of the hope, but Fields would progress and become the guy. And now, of course, Fields has had some bumpy games, couple good games. Now he's got an injury. And with things going the direction they're going, it just doesn't look good for Justin right now. So my question to you is, as someone who does national media and covers the NFL nationally, all 32 teams, what were your expectations for Justin Fields and the Bears going into the season? And where are you at now with both of them?
I think my expectation was control. I think that's the right word to use here. Somebody that feels like he's in control of the offense at this point, in control of what everything looks like, that takes that step of, okay, I'm not asking for anybody to be Mahomes. We got to be clear on here. If we're going to continually have the quarterback conversation compared to Mahomes, you might be basically saying, well, is my guy as good as what could end up being the best of all time, right? So I'm not asking for that. I'm not asking for freakish play either. But I think when you look at the amount of money the Bears had to spend coming into this offseason, and you looked at what the plan was going to be, the real trajectory here was about Justin Fields being in control and Justin Fields feeling like he can be the difference maker that consistently wins you football games. In the modern NFL, your quarterback has to be able to make 4 or 5 plays that are going to win you the game off schedule. I believe that. We haven't seen that from Justin Fields. So, there is going to be some conversation about whether or not that's the organization and coaching versus the player. I still think Justin Fields has some value in this league, but let's be real. No matter what team we'd be talking about right now, if you have a young quarterback that really hasn't proven it, and you may end up with the first pick in the draft, you are going to take a quarterback that resets the market, the contract situation for you, and is ultimately probably a better prospect. So I do right now, if Justin Fields played lights out for the rest of the year, I still don't think, if the Bears ended up with the first pick in the draft, I don't think there's any way he would be the quarterback next year.
Yeah. And here's kind of where I'm at with that is there's 2 ways. Let's just say Justin Fields misses the Raiders game, comes back, and like you said, plays lights out the rest of the year. You've got 2 courses that could go here. He plays so well, they start stacking wins. They get 6-7 wins on the season, have a great second half. What does he do, right? He may save his job. Okay, fine. But he also saves Matt Eberflus's job in the process. At least that's the way I look at it. I know some fans think that Matt Eberflus, is going to be gone no matter what because of how bad the defense has been and stuff. Okay, that's fine. Maybe that's the case. But if Matt Eberflus goes into Kevin Warren and George McCaskey's office at the end of the season and says, we won 6 out of our last 8 games and Justin Fields is playing well, he's going to make a strong case that everything's going in the right direction for 2024 to keep his job. So if you keep Justin Fields, you keep Matt Eberflus. On the other side of that coin, if Matt Eberflus is fired because the Bears didn't win enough games, and that's something they've never done, is fire a coach with 3 years left on his contract. So he's really going to have to screw up. If they win 4 or 5 games, it's not going to be possible to keep him. So if that's the case, and Justin Fields, let's say he has some flashes, he still plays pretty well. This is what you're looking at now. You're looking at Justin Fields. Whether it's his fault or not is irrelevant. 3 seasons in the league, 2 head coaches fired, and the season the coach wasn't fired, they had the worst record in the NFL. Whether you want to blame the quarterback or not, that's the reality. So now another coach is going to come in and determine, should we use one of these top 5 picks, because clearly that's where this is headed, on a quarterback, or do I hitch my wagon to Justin Fields, who I'm going to have to pay in a year, and a guy that has gotten 2 coaches fired? Again, unfair. If you want to say it's unfair, I'm not going to disagree, but that's the reality of the situation. To me, if there is a coaching change in Chicago, the percent goes almost all the way down to 0% that he has any chance to remain in Chicago.
No, I agree with everything you just said. Now, the one thing I'll say about Eberflus that I think fans might not be acknowledging, to your point, if they play well enough that they won 6 or 7 games, continuity is a sales pitch for a young quarterback. I think you step into the owner's office and you say, look at how well we played after the injury. Look at how well things normalized. Look at all the chaos we survived early in the season versus the way we got that all righted at the end of the year. Continuity is a sales pitch. And I've even talked to former coaches in the league that'll tell you that sometimes you will run it back with somebody just because, hey, we can get better if we stick together, right? So I think that's part one of it. But when you start talking about the scouting department, you can't tell me right now every scout that's looking at quarterbacks for the Bears isn't asking a very simple question: this or that. It's Justin Fields or Caleb Williams. And that answer is simple. I don't care what happened against Notre Dame. That answer is simple. Justin Fields versus Caleb Williams will be Caleb Williams all day, every day. Justin Fields versus Drake May. Justin Fields versus Michael Penix Jr. You know, you go up and down the list. Like, scouts, I should say, when they scout the quarterback position, I've talked to a couple of different scouts in the league that told me this consistently. They scout 2 to 3 years worth of quarterback classes. So last year, when teams decided they weren't willing to trade up, for example, to the number 1 overall pick or the number 2 overall pick, they weren't willing to give up as much sometimes for that quarterback. It's because they looked at last year and this year and they thought, well, you know, I mean, the argument has been made to me that Will Levis, who was drafted in the 2nd round by the Titans, was comped against next year's quarterback class, and teams felt like in next year's quarterback class, Will Levis would have been the 6th or 7th highest rated quarterback. Why would you trade up to take Will Levis when you can just wait and see what you get next year? This is the year that scouts have been looking at as the wait and see year. And it's not just Caleb Williams. So it becomes harder and harder for a quarterback that's on the verge of having to get some sort of compensation to keep their job. So the nice thing about this is there's clarity in it. You win enough games that you keep this job, then everybody should just relax, take a breath of fresh air here and say, hey, we've got our quarterback moving forward. If he doesn't, then you can be excited about who you think is going to come in and replace this. But replacement, man, like, look at this year. I mean, Anthony Richardson's going to miss the entire season now. We don't know if Anthony Richardson's going to be very good or not. Bryce Young, people are already asking, is Bryce Young going to be good enough? Like, these were supposed to be franchise saviors, and maybe they turn out to be that. But this concept that, you know what, fire the coach, get rid of the quarterback. Okay, the same dude that hired Eberflus, the same organization, I should say, that hired Eberflus is going to hire likely a new GM and a new owner. So you better hope you get it right this time. And you're going to go back to the draft, and you're going to hope that you don't have Baker Mayfield, right? Like, I mean, right. It's just all a crapshoot, and everybody wants to pretend that on the other side of that fence is beauty and delight. And sometimes on the other side of the fence is a lawn that's just as bad as yours.
Yeah, and that's it. The Bears have a unique opportunity because they've always done everything wrong. Like, you don't need to go back too far, but if you go back to 2012, they made a GM change. They got rid of Jerry Angelo and brought in Phil Emery and said, you have to keep Lovie Smith. And he said, okay. And then a year later, he fired Lovie Smith. And then, so things aren't lining up. He brings in Mark Trestman. Those 2 guys get blown out. Then they bring in John Fox and Ryan Pace, but that was an arranged marriage. Ryan Pace didn't get to pick his GM. Ernie Corsi picked the head coach, as a consultant. So then a year later, he says, all right, Ryan Pace says, I'm going to draft Mitch Trubisky. Doesn't even tell John Fox. So now you have a quarterback and a head coach not on the same page with the GM. Then, they get rid of John Fox. They bring in Matt Nagy, but Matt Nagy didn't get to pick the quarterback. So everything. And now you bring in the same thing with Matt Eberflus. Now you're saddling him with the quarterback. Like, they never line everything up. So if they give Ryan Poles another opportunity, that, I could live with it, because the one thing Ryan Poles has done, the process is sound. He cleared a lot of bad contracts. He created a lot of cap space. He picked up a lot of draft capital. He traded for DJ Moore. Like, it's a sound process. But the free agent evaluation and some of the draft evaluation is can be questioned. And I think that's up to Kevin Warren here in the front office to determine, do you want this guy continuing to make these evaluations moving forward? But regardless of that, whether Poles is there or not, you finally have a chance to line up, hopefully, an offensive-minded head coach who helps get to pick his own quarterback, bring everything in together, line everything up, and do this the right way, something they haven't done in literally 15 years of the modern NFL. So there's an opportunity for a franchise, and I know you can appreciate this as a Raiders fan, a franchise that continually does things the wrong way to finally do it the right way.
Yeah, and to that end, I think the right way is really clear in my mind. The right way to do this is to empower bring in a GM or keep your GM. I don't care which way you want to do it in that situation, but you empower your GM to make a coaching decision. And when you're making that coaching decision, you already know where you sit in the draft. So from the day you're doing the interview, the question is, we're thinking of going this way. We're thinking of this. What vision can we be? So then you get your coach, your GM, and your quarterback all on the same page from day one. It's super simple to do that. I have referred to on some of my Yahoo sports shows, and I hope you find humor in this. I'm not, jabbing at you, but this year I keep referring to the Bears as a grocery store team, because last year they had a ton of money in the offseason. So like you go to the grocery store and you go shopping, and then you get home, you stock the whole fridge, you walk out, and then you're sitting there with your significant other and you're like, what's for dinner? And you open the fridge and you're like, we don't have anything. We just went to the damn grocery store. How do we not have anything? That's what I feel like the Bears have been stuck in this year. So I think there is some level, because they had $90 million. We all talked about it nationally. It was like the Bears they have so much money to spend, and they have Justin Fields. This is a reason for hope. Okay, that didn't work. And at some point, you got to stop throwing bad money at good, and you got to figure out what does work, because realistically, whatever happened this year doesn't matter. There is one in this year's draft, supposedly can't miss prospect. Now, I will remind everybody, Trevor Lawrence hasn't won a Super Bowl. Andrew Luck didn't win a Super Bowl. The last two times that we've talked about quarterbacks as can't miss, feels like those were the two that really stood out. Joe Burrow is somebody I loved coming out of LSU, but there were people that thought, well, it's a one-year wonder, right? Right. When we say can't miss, it's rare that it turns into actually – even Peyton Manning, when he was drafted for the first few years, they were like, I don't know, can't win the big game. Like, having the first overall pick in the draft does not mean that you suddenly get it right. That being said, Caleb Williams is electrifying. Caleb Williams is a reason for hope. Caleb Williams plays the position in a way that looks fun. Now, is he going to have in the NFL 10 seconds to run around to then throw it to some guy against a bad Pac-12 defense? No, but it's so can't miss that this year right now, everything's, if you're Bears, this is the one thing I would say is everything's good in front of you, because you are either going to get the answer that you do have the right people in the room, or you're going to get the answer that this whole damn thing's being blown up. And either way, you got to find hope out of that. The worst situation to be in the NFL is 8-9 every year. The Bears I don't think they're going to be there this year. I think the Bears season is going to fall apart. I think Justin Fields is going to be traded to somebody else for a conditional draft pick, and they're going to restart this whole thing. But of all the years to do it, there are quarterbacks in this year that are just like Michael Penix Jr., I'll mention it again. He's worth being excited about. So I think there are quarterbacks out there that make the reset feel different this time.
Yeah, and this is one thing that I think is kind of interesting is when you look at the situation to put a quarterback in, and as Bears fans, we always talk about how we've ruined quarterbacks, and maybe we have. Maybe the franchise is the reason why these quarterbacks didn't succeed. But if we look at the last two, you don't need to go back to Cutler and his merry-go-round of offensive coordinators. But if you just look at the last two in terms of developing a rookie quarterback, Mitch Trubisky, the plan was for him not to play in 2017. Josh Lucas has done a bunch of interviews, the former director of player personnel for the Bears, and he's been very forthright. He said there was absolutely no plan to play Mitch Trubisky in 2017. But Mike Glennon was so bad, they had to throw him out there. They had an offensive line that was still a work in progress. They literally had no receivers to throw to. Marcus Wheaton was their top receiver. They had nothing there, and that's a rough spot to put a rookie. Now, things got a lot better in 2018, where they could spend and bring in Allen Robinson and Taylor Gabriel and all these different things. So that certainly put Mitch Trubisky behind the eight ball. Then you look at Justin Fields. The Bears, Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy were literally trying to cling to their jobs and brought in a rookie quarterback to try and win games immediately with a guy that needed to develop. It was a failed recipe from the start. If they couldn't bring in Russell Wilson or Derek Carr or all these veterans that they were trying to get before, once that failed and Andy Dalton was their guy, Justin Fields wasn't going to help them win games in 2021. So then out they go, and now you've got Justin Fields learning a new offense and all this. So everything's been a mess when they try and develop a rookie quarterback. But this year, this Bears offensive line, it's okay. Darnell Wright's go the right way. Nate Davis is pretty good. Tevin Jenkins, when he plays, pretty good. Braxton Jones, if he gets healthy, pretty good. Like, you can drop a rookie quarterback behind this offensive line, if they get a better center, and go, all right, he should get enough protection. He'd have DJ Moore. If you have 2 top 5 picks, he could have Marvin Harrison next to DJ Moore. You could have some dynamic weapons. Cole Kmet's a good safety valve. You'd actually, for the one time, the Chicago Bears would be in a position to, like I said, not only just line everything up the right way, but actually have an established offense that may not be amazing, but it certainly has the foundation to put a rookie quarterback in to be successful and not have him get pounded like Bryce Young is in Carolina, or Trubisky in 2017, Fields in 2021, and plenty of others like it.
So a couple of big thoughts on what you just said. Number one, I'm going to give Bears fans all a message of hope when it comes to one particular quarterback, because I mentioned Mahomes earlier. And I worked with Sarah Spain on radio all the time. And at the time, Sarah was talked about, we could have had Mahomes. I hear that all the time. What we forget is that Patrick Mahomes has openly admitted countless times in interviews that the biggest part of his transition to becoming a pro is having Alex Smith show him how to play the position, how to break down his week, what days to do what to eat, how to break down film, like the most effective ways to be a professional. While at the same time, Andy Reid was sitting with him and working with him constantly, molding him into something where he didn't have to play year one. Every single fan base says, how did we not draft Mahomes? And my constant reminder to the world is that drafting Mahomes in any other situation may not have made Mahomes. Sometimes no matter how talented a guy is, you got to have the right things in the right places at the right times. It takes a great coach and a great system and a great understanding from a great organization. Like, all of these things have to come together to create it. So, like, your point on Trubisky is a really important one. But the other point that you're making here about the weapons that the Bears have, I think is something Bears fans need to remember next season. Let's say Chicago comes out and they win 4 games, just enough that they are not going to be the Broncos make my life hell. They turn around, they get Caleb Williams. Now I have to take on Mahomes, Herbert, and Williams for the next 15 years as a Raiders fan. But this is the one thing I keep reminding fans is, like, look at the most successful team right now in the NFL today. In this season and over the last couple of seasons, I would argue there is not a better front office, coach, and roster construction than the San Francisco 49ers, no matter what it's meant for the Super Bowl. What did they do at every turn? Yes, they traded up aggressively for Trey Lance. They were able to do that and still be wrong, because at every turn, they drafted the best player available on the board. The number of years when I was covering the draft for ESPN that we would sit there and say, well, the 49ers have to take a quarterback. No, they didn't. They took the guy that was absolutely, unequivocally the best player on the board. And where we all get screwed up as a society is we look at it and say, got to have a quarterback, got to have a quarterback, got to have a quarterback. The 49ers now we're sitting here saying, well, their quarterback really isn't all that good. It's just a system quarterback. Look at all the guys around him. Part of the reason that's happening, and which I don't necessarily always agree with, is because they built a great roster 1 to 53. Like, their skill position players would start on any Super Bowl team. Their offensive line would start on any Super Bowl team. Their stars on defense would start on any Super Bowl team. Like, sometimes the method that we have to remember going into the draft, like if suddenly you're looking at it as a Bears organization and you're saying, well, you know what? We're kind of certain that Drake May's the answer, but we're not 100% certain. We don't really need this superstar, Jared Verse, the defensive lineman out of Florida State. We don't need him. We need a quarterback. That's the wrong thing. Like, when you are picking at the top of the draft because your team sucks, pick the best player of it. Clearly, look at your board and say, who's the guy? Because we become so quarterback obsessed that part of the way you break the cycle of being wrong at the quarterback position is you make the rest of the roster so good that Brock Purdy can come in and win you football games.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've got a sound process, and if they do if the Bears do jettison Ryan Poles, they have Peters would be a guy, their assistant GM, that I would love to bring to Chicago and kind of bring that same mentality. But let me ask you this: since the Bears are in a unique spot and they're going to have 2 first-round picks and 2 first-round picks, thanks to the Carolina Panthers, that could be in the top 5. They certainly look like both teams are trending in that direction. So before I ask you about quarterbacks, I do want to ask you, and I brought his name up a couple minutes ago, Marvin Harrison, because that's the guy to me that if the Bears can get a quarterback, whoever, May, Williams, whoever it is, with one of those picks, and Marvin Harrison is the other selection, with pairing that with DJ Moore, to me, could be one of the most electric tandems at wide receiver that the NFL, and I'm not saying the NFL doesn't have its share of electric tandems, but that to me Harrison is one of the best wide receiver prospects I've seen since I've really started following the league. I mean, you got to go like Calvin Johnson level prospect to me.
Yeah, most years Harrison he is so good that even as a wide receiver, he would be the first overall pick. That's how good he is. And I think the biggest comp here, right, is Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Like Joe Burrow comes in, gets hurt, they suck, they get Jamar Chase, they eventually get T. Higgins. And what do you know? Like that Bengals offensive line has been a prop. They've spent a ton of money, but they've not been able to get the offensive line to be great. They've been pretty good on defense, and they've had Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, and T. Higgins. And it has resulted in this, right? Year in and year out, the Bengals are now a Super Bowl contender. I think what you do suddenly, if you put yourself in a situation where you have young player, young quarterback, and young wide receiver growing together, absolutely. That makes all the sense in the world. And, the other top prospects, you got the offensive line kid out of Penn State. You've got, like I said, and you've got Jared Verse is going to end up being one of the big prospects out of Florida State. Already is pass rusher. You've got some of those out there.
Brock Bowers.
Brock Bowers, a great example also. But when you want to talk about immediately changes the whole way you defend a team, I mean, that's Marvin Harrison. So, like, if you end up with the first 2 picks in the draft and you take your quarterback of the future with Marvin Harrison Jr., you are now putting yourself in a situation where your offense becomes electric, combining that with DJ. Like that, DJ's the other part of this that you could end up looking really like for all of the problems that the Bears have right now. Think about this. They landed a wide receiver that is fully capable to be a wide receiver 1. They did not take a quarterback in a draft where I was covering it for ESPN, said it at the time. I didn't think there was a single quarterback that didn't have a question mark. The closest we had was CJ Stroud. And I'm not just saying that because it turned out to be right. But like the closest we had was CJ Stroud. As a Raiders fan, the only quarterback I would have wanted the Raiders to draft would have been CJ Stroud. That was the only one. And even that didn't feel all that great to me, right? Like, so you get out of the draft when you weren't sure that the right guy was there. You bought yourself an extra year. Now you could be sitting there with the first and second overall picks. Like, that's playing chess when everybody else is playing checkers.
Yeah. Now let me ask you about quarterbacks. And I agree. I think multiple quarterbacks from this draft are better than any of the prospects from the previous year. But Williams and May, let's talk about them first, because a lot of people, I think for whatever reason, Caleb Williams with kind of the personality and kind of some of the stuff he says, it rubs a few people the wrong way. So I do think there is something where people kind of cheer against him a little bit from time to time. So, and when Bears fans were hearing so much Caleb Williams when they are firmly in Justin Fields' corner, that game against Notre Dame, a lot of people jumped on Caleb. So, see, finally plays a good defense. It stinks. So now Patrick Mahomes, I think, had a 3 interception or 4 interception game his last year at Texas Tech. Now, he wasn't the same level of prospect, but for you, when you look at quarterbacks, I know, like you said, that you really look at the big picture, but how much when you say that the Pac-12, have terrible defenses and 450 yards of passing, isn't that impressive when you get walloped by Notre Dame like that? How much of a concern would that be for you for a prospect?
I don't think it's that. Look, here's what Caleb Williams did wrong in that game. He tried to do too much, right? And that's going to happen sometimes in these situations. I mean, when you think about who Lincoln Riley is as a play caller, he makes his quarterbacks better. There's no doubt about that. But also, he's giving them a ton of pro looks, pro concepts out of the gates. So he's running a very pro style offense. He does a lot. He improvs a lot. But one thing I heard Ryan Clark say on ESPN this week is that you have to have a quarterback that 4 times a game can break a 15-yard run out of nowhere to keep a drive alive. That's just what happens. And Mahomes has done that at an alarming rate. Justin Herbert, is another example of somebody that does that. You've got to have that quarterback that now in today's world can make a play where there is nothing to make. Caleb Williams does that absolutely better than anybody, right? So, when you start talking about level of competition, you could make that argument all the way across the board. I mean, is Drake May really facing these great stoic, oh my God, defenses in the ACC? Like, he's facing a few of them, but it's not all that. If you go down the list and you look at Bo Nix, like I would challenge anybody that's in love with Bo Nix, because I think there's been some beautiful stuff from Bo Nix all the way back at Auburn to now. Go look at his home and his away splits. Because away quarterback Bo Nix, alarmingly bad statistically. Home quarterback Bo Nix, alarmingly good. Why? So, my point there is that there are questions to be asked at every single turn for all of these quarterbacks. I think Caleb Williams has the least number of those questions, and his ability, you just need a good offensive coach, a good quarterback coach that from day one is going to come in and say, hey, What do we need you to do? Think about it. Like, there were people that said CJ Stroud's problem was that he wasn't athletic enough and that the windows were too big and his wide receivers were too good and that it wasn't going to translate. Well, it turns out it's absolutely translated for CJ Stroud, right? I think for Caleb, we've normalized greatness to the point that coming in and having a second Heisman level season, we're trying to find fault with. I think Caleb Williams has shown us on tape everything we could ever want. There's always a question mark. I have the fewest with Caleb.
All right. Now, a lot of Bears fans have PTSD. And what I mean by that is post-Trubisky stress disorder. So when you come up with the idea of drafting a North Carolina quarterback, they're instantly going to shudder. And I see this, like when I've talked about this on Twitter/X, I see it regularly. I can't deal with another North Carolina quarterback. Like they're scarred. So I ask you, when you're talking to Bears fans, what do you say about Drake May to say he is not Mitch Trubisky?
Well, they're completely different styles of quarterbacks. I think that's important to point out. But here's a better comp. And I think Drake May is a more polished passing version of Sam Howell, right? Like Sam Howell is the better comp because of the recency in which they came out in North Carolina and the offensive line. My biggest concern is, I'll go back to Sam for a second. I talked to one of the people that knows the coaches well at North Carolina, and they said that the coaching concept that they're teaching offensively there is just simple. It's fine green grass. So they're not necessarily coming in with these, okay, you're going to throw this ball to this receiver in this spot. It's we're all going to find little pockets and we're going to find ways to get open. That's a great way to run a college offense, and it's a terrible way to run a pro offense. So I think there are concerns there. But Drake May is a very athletic quarterback that's also, by the way, a very good passer. And that's the difference. Like Trubisky was one of those guys that you saw enough to see good from, and everybody falls in love with that. There's so much more proof of concept on Drake May and who he is. There's more tape on who he is. There's more examples of him making pinpoint throws at the right time than we ever saw for Trubisky. Like Trubisky from minute one was a little bit like Anthony Richardson, where it's like, hey, I've seen these great plays and you can't coach that. Okay, but what about the stuff you need to be able to coach? And Drake May has shown that he's absolutely capable of that. So I think it's a bit unfair to the player to lump him in just because of his school.
Oh, absolutely it is. But I'm just saying, it's going to happen.
Yeah, you're right.
All right. Well, let me ask you then, for you, who would be like, let's talk about this from a Bears perspective, where they are not picking first or second, that their picks are in the 3, 4, 5 range. So if they're looking at potentially the third quarterback in this draft, which no one's projecting to be that high currently, but you know what's going to happen by the time we get to the end of the college football season and we get to the combine, someone's rocketing up. Anthony Richardson at this point was a second round pick, last year, and rocketed all the way up to a top 5 selection. So for you right now, when you talk about the third quarterback here, because I think there's a lot to debate here. I mean, people have brought up McCarthy, people have brought up Shedeur Sanders, Michael Penix Jr., guy you brought up earlier. So where are you with kind of the rest of this quarterback class? Who are the names that are popping for you?
I think JJ is wildly underrated because he's a Michigan quarterback and people think Michigan quarterbacks can only run the football. I think for me, the third best quarterback in the draft so far, and we've got a lot of season left to go, is somewhere between Penix Jr. and JJ McCarthy. And Penix Jr., it's difficult to look back at his time in Indiana and figure out what to do with it, because in Indiana against Big Ten defenses, he got knocked around a lot, got hit a lot, held the ball too long. He's figured a lot of that out at Washington. The question is that just because different type of opponent? Like, how much is what he's doing because he's evolved? Like, those are questions we don't necessarily know the answer to yet, but Penix Jr. is one of those guys that feels like he needs a little development, but could develop into a very competent quarterback. In my opinion, like if I was sitting here and the Raiders were picking third, I'd want Michael Penix Jr. or JJ McCarthy. I think Bo Nix is, like I said, his away problems are an issue for me. Riley Leonard is the guy that I think is a better comp to Mitchell Trubisky, like the kid out of Duke. Like, we've seen a little bit of good out of him, but let's be real. There's such a brand bias. When I say Duke football, people are like, I mean, Duke football sucks. So you see somebody playing pretty well for Duke and you're like, he must be the second coming. Like, Riley Leonard does some things okay, but I just don't think there's any. If Riley Leonard was a second round draft pick, I would buy into that. I am not buying into Riley as a first round draft pick for me. So I think JJ McCarthy's offensive control has been great. My biggest problem is, I keep railing on this on my college football coverage, Michigan has played nobody. Like cupcakes in Nebraska. That's it. Right. So, man, I think that's where Ohio State, that game this year, holds so much equity, because we really need to see how JJ McCarthy plays. The one reminder I'll give everybody too about Penix Jr. and JJ McCarthy both, and this is a trend, start looking for success of college football quarterbacks that have played a lot of college football. Like Sam Hartman's been up and down a little bit for Notre Dame, but part of the reason that there were high expectations is because my guy's been playing college football for what feels like 27 years. You start thinking about the guys that are coming into the league that are having fast success. A lot of them have played a lot of football. Like I think the transfer portal is going to create this version of veteran quarterbacks that we're going to have to figure out, like, hey, what do those smarts equal? And that's the opportunity for JJ McCarthy. He's played enough at this point that, like, what does a smart veteran college football quarterback do against a well-coached team like Ohio State? If Michigan goes on a run, JJ McCarthy is going to absolutely, I think, skyrocket up draft boards.
All right. Now, before I let you go, I have to ask you a little bit about the Raiders. We ended up spending a lot of time there on quarterbacks and the way to put together a franchise. But the Raiders, let me start here, because this is a team that moved on from Derek Carr and went a different direction at quarterback. Was that the plan? Well, I mean, was Jimmy Garoppolo, was that the plan at quarterback, or was that the Bears ending up with Andy Dalton? Kind of it didn't work out for them at quarterback. What was really the plan there for the Raiders?
Yeah, it was the intentional backup plan. And everything I've heard from people around the team and around the league is that the Raiders were all in on CJ Stroud. They tried to make a trade offer to move up with the Bears. They wanted to pick first overall. They wanted to get CJ Stroud. That didn't materialize. As you know, the Panthers gave a better offer. And so, that put them in plan B. And plan B for them was always going to be, there isn't a quarterback we believe in, so who can we get in that can be a stopgap? And that's Jimmy G. So they brought in somebody that they didn't see a marked difference between Jimmy G and Derek Carr. And I think, frankly, the relationship between the Raiders and Carr had just deteriorated to the spot where fans weren't going to buy it anymore. The team wasn't going to buy it anymore. The player wasn't buying it anymore. It was just time to move on. So, Jimmy G was really just the backup plan that came to fruition. And that's, at this point, that's all it is. And this weekend, the Bears are more likely to see, at this point, I believe they're more likely to see Aiden O'Connell than they are. This is the confusing thing, because Brian Hoyer is the backup for the Raiders. But earlier this season, when Jimmy G wasn't available, Aiden O'Connell got the start against the Chargers. In the first half, O'Connell held the ball way too long. Khalil Mack goes off. It was absolutely an epic game for Mack. Second half, AOC gets much better in that situation, has better pocket awareness. So we'll see. I think they believe every week they make Brian Hoyer the number 2, because they believe in the middle of a game, if you got to throw a guy in, Hoyer's going to do better. And he did last week. But they've also shown the belief that, hey, if we have all week to game plan for it, Aiden O'Connell is going to be the guy. And if that's the case, you were putting in a rookie quarterback that is staggeringly low on experience, that holds the ball too long, waits for plays to develop. Well, it'll be interesting to see what that looks like against Chicago.
Yeah, and let me ask you this. As a Raider fan, where were your expectations with this team? Because I'm just going to say something. It feels like the Raiders are winning too much. I had low expectations for this team. Tyson Bagent most likely getting his first start as an undrafted free agent rookie here this week. I assume the Raiders are about to move to 4-3 on the season, although I think it's possible, if Bagent gets lucky with a couple things, that maybe the Bears being it's at home, maybe the Bears can hang on and win this one. But again, I would expect the Raiders to win this game. So you're looking at a 4-3 Raiders team but I've seen a lot of complaints about Josh McDaniels, but this team is winning games here. So where are the expectations with this Las Vegas Raiders team?
Fans want the team to go into full suck mode and get a different quarterback. I don't think Josh McDaniels can survive that. Like, I think a 3-win season would have been a death knell for him at this point. So, and then the other part of it is, like, this is where it's hard for the Raiders. You mentioned a great situation for a rookie quarterback. I argued coming into this year that having Max Crosby play at the level he's playing at, Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, we thought, Jacoby Myers, and Josh Jacobs, it's a great situation for a rookie quarterback, right? Like, you're putting a rookie quarterback around a bunch of weapons. That's a beautiful thing. I think my expectations coming in was a 7-win season, and my expectations are still around a 7-win season. The problem is the middle of the NFL is just all so mediocre that mediocre teams are beating up on mediocre teams. And then you play a good team like when the Raiders played the Bills, they got run out of the building. The Chiefs will absolutely destroy them twice because Kansas City's markedly better. So I think the Raiders are in, like, the problem is in that middle third of the league, they're in the middle of the middle third. So they're going to win 6-7 games, which means they're going to be picking somewhere next year between 10th and 15th. And that means you're making the decision every single year. Are you going to pick the 5th best quarterback in this year's draft and try and move on? Or are you going to pick the best player on the board, no matter who that player is? So I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if I'm sitting here a year from now and Jimmy G is still the starting quarterback of the Raiders and they went offensive line in this year's draft and just took the best guy, or defensive line took the best guy they could get on that board.
Yeah, because we've talked about some of these names. If the Raiders are in that 10 to 15 range, like you brought up, and let's say 4 or 5 quarterbacks go in the top 10, which is a distinct possibility. We saw it, a few years ago with the Josh Allen, quarterback class. Rosen and Mayfield and Darnold, like all these guys went early. So if that happens with guys, we talked about with Marvin Harrison and Fashanu and Alt and Verse and Bowers, like you're going to have a lot of talent pushing down into that 11, 12, 13 range. There's going to be, if a lot of quarterbacks go early, the Raiders are going to be in a tough situation to pick quarterback or a talent that potentially is a top 5, 6 talent most seasons, but is sitting there at 12 when the Raiders are on the clock.
Yeah, that's going to be the great. But look, this year, a couple of the guys that started to fall because of the run on quarterbacks, Christian Gonzalez, right? Like we saw corners that fell in the draft far lower than we thought they would, and they've been playing at a high level. I've seen mock drafts that have Quinn Ewers out of Texas go to the Raiders in the middle of the first round. You got to ask yourself the question then, if you're taking on Patrick Mahomes for the next 15 years, is Quinn Ewers going to be the quarterback that grows into beating Patrick Mahomes? Or do you just need to continue to address the rest of it? It's the 49er method, versus, slow and low like barbecue, or are you going to try and microwave this thing? And I don't think Quinn Ewers is, it's a microwave burrito. Like you wanted the burrito, you got the burrito, and after you ate the burrito, you're like, was it really worth it? Like you just got to sit back and you got to let this stuff simmer.
So let me ask you this to wrap up here on the conversation with Jason Fitz. Really been enjoying this. The Raiders as an organization, because, the Bears fans, again, are sitting here with an organization that, like I talked about earlier, just continues to do things the wrong way. The Raiders, is this an organization that you feel comfortable with Josh McDaniels and what they've done here? Because this is, again, an organization. Yeah, John Gruden gave him a giant contract. Of course, he gets in trouble with with the emails. You trade away Khalil Mack, which is never anything you want to do, is trading away a blue chip player like that. Yes, you got Josh Jacobs, but you also was it Damon Arnett like that. The fruits didn't quite work out like I think Raiders were hoping for with those draft picks. So Mark Davis is unique as an owner, I guess. So where are you and Raiders fans with this organization? Is it still, is it better in Vegas? Is it still kind of bumbling around there? Is it the right direction? Where are the Raiders?
I mean, it's better in Vegas because they're competitive, right? Like in Oakland, they weren't even competitive most years. And they haven't been competitive for most of the last 20. Like you mentioned, consecutive winning seasons. I haven't seen that since 2002. So, when you start thinking about that level of disaster, it's funny. People make a big deal. I'm about to write some stuff on this for Yahoo. People make a big deal about the lack of home field advantage in Vegas, but the home record in Vegas so far is actually better than the home winning percentage was in their second stint in Oakland. So like you look at that and you just realize how long this team has just been terrible. Mark Davis owns the Vegas Aces, who are on the verge of trying to win their second consecutive WNBA championship. His method with that was, I'm going to sign a bunch of stars and I'm going to hire the biggest name coach for the most money possible. That worked. Like Becky Hammon and a bunch of stars for the Vegas Aces results in championships. That doesn't necessarily work in the NFL. Like it's just, you can't do that. So at some point, and this would be my same message to every fan base that sucks. My first interview ever I did in my life when I was just a podcast nobody knew about. My first big interview with Adam Schefter. And I remember sitting there and I asked Shefty, who's now a friend, and I said, hey, buddy, tell me this. What's the difference between a good team, a good organization, and a bad organization? Without hesitation, he said continuity. If you can find an organization willing to relax and respect continuity, that eventually wins. And I think about that because what do you do? And I don't know the answer to this. What do you do when maybe you don't have the right coach? Do you just keep firing the right coach, the coach every couple of years? But also, as I said earlier, who's making that hire? Raiders fans want Josh McDaniels fired, and they want Dave Ziegler maybe fired. Well, okay. Mark Davis is still the same person that hired John Gruden and Mike Mayock and, go all the way back and then hired Josh McDaniels and hired Dave Ziegler. So the same person's going to be hiring these people. At some point, you got to just step back and say, hey, can we grow something? How long does that take? I don't know the answer to this, but it's hard because you see other teams hire a coach and almost immediately, like Nick Sirianni has been great with the Colts so far. They're so much better than expectations were for the Colts. Like, I see why they have hope. I honestly believe that if you are a fan of a team that doesn't have the answer at quarterback, you believe that the sky is falling. And that's why Raiders fans want everybody fired. They want a quarterback. That's why Bears fans want everybody fired. They want a quarterback. But ultimately, if you want to become Kansas City, if you want to become San Francisco, if you want to become Buffalo, like what do all of those teams have in common that are continually successful? They have given continuity to their coaching staffs. They've given continuity to their front office, and they've let everybody cook. And so I don't know what the right approach is. I just know that blowing it all up again doesn't make me feel hopeful, because I don't know why it would be any different this time than it's been the last 15 years of watching the organization blow it up.
Well, there you go, Bears fans. If it's not going to get better, and hopefully it will for Chicago, at least you can commiserate with someone else who's struggling.
Let's go
with a franchise that continually disappoints their fan base. Jason, thanks so much. Thanks for so much time. It was a lot longer than I expected, but that was a great conversation. Really appreciate it. I'll say good luck to the Raiders starting next week, although maybe a loss is better for the Bears. Some fans may be cheering for that as well. Thanks so much. And you can follow Jason at Jason Fitz on Twitter, and of course catch him on Yahoo and Fox Sports Radio on Saturday mornings. Thanks so much, Jay.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate you.